Lou's making me jealous. Looks like he got a haircut. I have an appointment with my person to cut my hair, but it's a little dangerous now.
What, your hair?
Getting my hair cut. It's very expensive. It's my wife cutting it. It's like she's got me like this. And it's, you know, it's one thing paying $10 to $15, and it's like, okay, honey, it's not really. It's really more like this. She's got those scissors.
She would never do that.
When we got married, Robin cut my hair for a while, and when she said "oops" for the third time, I stopped it.
My problem is my wife's getting better every time. I'm thinking about keeping this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How often does she do it?
It's been about 5 weeks now, but it's a little bit long, but
That's not bad.
3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I humor myself saying I need a haircut.
Well, I've been getting my hair cut, but my barber says, you know, everybody has to wear a mask the whole time you're there. So, you know, there are certain parts that don't get cut so well. Oh, well. All right. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Rabbi, can I ask you real quick before we start? Did you need any video today?
I don't think so. I think, you know, we didn't get very far in Unit 8. I'm hoping we'll finish it today. I don't see us getting beyond.
Sounds good.
Well, you never know, but that's our class. So, Lou, what is that on your ceiling? Or your wall?
It looks like a gigantic bus.
Yeah, I mean it's not moving, but I'm scared just looking at it.
Oh, yeah, that does look like a bug.
I'm visiting my grandchildren in Atlanta.
Oh, and you're
nice.
joining us from Atlanta.
I am joining you from Atlanta.
That's what distance learning is all about, isn't it?
You know, thank God for virtual learning. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, glad everybody
Baruch
is
Hashem.
here today.
That is funny.
We are going to pick up where we left off, and I'm hoping that we actually left off where I think we did, and that is on number 3 in Unit 8. Right? So this is another teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and this is about joy. Right? So Baal Shem Tov has a little parable here, which is typical of much of Hasidic teaching. Prayer that is said with great joy is certainly more worthy and desirable to God than prayer said with sadness and weeping. The parable for this: when a pauper asks, requests, and pleads before a human king with great weeping, the king only gives him a small amount. But when a nobleman arranges for a king a great celebration, and in the midst of his praises also, let's scroll down, makes his request, the king gives him a large gift, as is fitting for a nobleman. Right, so, you know, the first question I would ask about this is, what does it mean to pray with joy?
I suspect that they don't. Well, maybe they do, considering the source. I think they simply mean a positive attitude, thanking for blessings, appreciating what God has given, that sort of thing. But maybe considering the source, they mean actual joy, dancing and whatever. I don't know.
Well, in Hasidic practice, I think you'll find both. Anyone else?
I think it raises a couple questions about, do we really believe that God answers us directly our prayers? If we ask for something, we're to get it, because how we ask it, that's implying that how we ask it makes a difference. Like I'm thinking about like Shema Kolenu that we say, and maybe the Chazan pours his heart out and does this thing here and cries. I think that makes a difference versus us, doing other prayers where we're more positive, if you will.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of this idea that God prefers prayers offered with joy over prayers offered in sadness? Yeah, Marcia.
Well, one of the things that I was looking at was the person who was asking for the gift, whether it was the nobleman or whether it was the pauper. And I think there's a distinction being made there in terms of, well, maybe the pauper isn't worth as much of a gift as the nobleman, who has much more money to begin with. And having just read the book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste, I can really understand that. So I think, that being an example was probably not the best example to give, because you're talking about people of different classes, or as she would say, castes.
Yeah. But I think the idea that the Baal Shem Tov wanted to get across with this parable is that every human being is a nobleman. And all the more so, you as part of God's people, right, you get the benefit of that too. I saw a hand from either Carolyn or David. Yeah, Carolyn.
Hi. Yeah, I was also looking at it from the perspective of how you mentally come into something with joy can affect your perception of an outcome as well. If you come in, and are looking at things positively, you see positive results often, as opposed to coming in with a just sort of morose starting place.
Mm-hmm.
So that self-actualized answers to prayers.
Yes. Yes, Daniel.
Just briefly, I'm thinking of, I guess, last week's Parsha, in which offerings are only made with unblemished animals and meal and whatever. And it's just a similar message to me that if you're going to offer something to God, it should not be blemished. It should be almost exactly what Carolyn just said, I guess. It should be with positive joy of blessings rather than woe is me.
Yeah.
Yismechu.
Yismechu Hashemayim, or Yismechu b'malachutecha. Yes, Steve.
I still have a problem with that parable, because for me, I attach more to the concept of being joy versus being bitter or being negative, but I don't think you can compare a nobleman and a person in need, because sometimes a nobleman is, I'm thinking like how our community collects dollars to help people. We have these, people ask other people to help, but it's not for themselves. The nobleman, I'm thinking, probably doesn't need this help for himself. It's because he or she wants to help others. Maybe it's a process. So when our community raises dollars for JFS or Federation and things like that, or not just Jewish, lots of organizations have these balls, have these other events where they ask people with more resources to help those who don't.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment here? Yeah, Chris.
I was thinking of praise versus asking. Praise that the Creator gives, and asking is pleading. And one has faith with the praise and giving thanks to God, and the other one is asking, pleading, and does not have the faith, but maybe doubt.
Mm-hmm. And so, the attitude of the one who prays with joy is, I already have, if not what I want, I have what I need. I have what I have. And that's something to be joyful for. right? And of course, remember that this is a critique of a different kind of Judaism, one that, in the 18th century really did not focus very much on joy. Your service to God was your service to God, and you did it whether you liked it or not. The Baal Shem Tov says, why not like it? Why not love it? Right? So, the parable may be problematic for some people, but in the context
Hi.
of the time, I think it has.
Go to the link that Lisa Unsel sent.
Someone needs to mute. Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to number 4. And I'm going to put this back on the screen, but I have to tell you that I had some problems with this, and I went back to the folks who wrote the curriculum, and they changed the description of this text. Shivchei Habesht, in praise of the Baal Shem Tov, was a book that was published in 1815. It was not written by Dov Ber, the successor to the Baal Shem Tov. It is a classic compilation of stories and legends about the Baal Shem Tov that were told by various rabbis, preachers, teachers, ritual slaughterers. But modern scholars really struggle to separate out what parts of this book are historical and what parts are just, kind of fantastic and miraculous stories that were told about the Baal Shem Tov. And it's written and published 55 years after the death of the Baal Shem Tov. So it's not really a reliable Hebrew, a reliable historical source. It is, however, very interesting in terms of what it does emphasize about the Baal Shem Tov. And this particular text portrays another example of prayer with ecstasy, which is something that, Baal Shem Tov was definitely well known for. And it's very different from the kind of prayer that the Mitnagdim used, which was much more rigid, much more disciplined, much more silent. Right? So here's what the Shivchei Habesh.
Rabbi, are you saying that the Dov Ber did not write it or did not compile? Because it says compile.
The Maggid of Mezrich was not the author of Shivchei Habesh. That was an error in the curriculum materials.
All right, I just want to make sure I understood.
It's been corrected for the next iteration. But there's been a lot of scholarship done in recent years on this particular book. I had to familiarize myself with it a little bit in preparation for my book. And the guy who did the curriculum on this, Dr. Fishman, he certainly knows a lot about Hasidism in general, but he hadn't read the source material on Shivchei Habesh. So we got, a little acquainted. Anyhow, so here's what this story says. Once they had to say Hallel. It was Rosh Chodesh or it was Chol HaMoed, whatever. Rabbi Abraham was reciting Shachrit before the ark. The Best was praying in his usual place, probably in the corner or in the front of the room. And during the repetition of the Amidah, the Best, the Baal Shem Tov, trembled greatly as he always did while praying. And everyone who looked at the best while he was praying noticed this trembling. Rabbi Wolf Kutzes is one of his Hasidim. Looked at his face and he saw that it was burning like a torch. And the best's eyes were bulging. I already knew from his best disciples that he used to utter a great cry and pray louder than anyone else. Okay? So, now these are some interesting features of the Baal Shem Tov's prayer. What do you make of this? You know, of his prayer practice? I mean, what do you think would happen if somebody at Beth Yeshurun did this?
They call a doctor.
They'd call a doctor, right?
It wasn't clear to
Preferably
me
a
what was going
psychiatrist.
on here. It seems like during the repetition, at first I thought maybe they forgot to do Hallel. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, no.
Supposed to do it, and so why did something impact him only during the repetition? Something impact him during recitation of Hallel? I don't understand the difference. But what's, I don't know, I don't.
That's a great
Yeshurun.
question, Steve. I'm going to give you my gut answer to it, which is the repetition of the Amida, you know, is only recited by the reader. If you're not leading the services, and the Baal Shem Tov wasn't at that moment, he's free to meditate on anything or in any way that he chooses. And so it's like he's flying free. That, I think, is the significance of the fact that it's during the repetition.
That's something from Hallel, the power of Hallel took a while to 10 minutes to get to his soul that way, or?
No, Hallel comes later, comes after the repetition of the Amida. Unless you were talking
Yeah.
about Musaf.
Yeah.
Right?
I
So-
was struck.
Yes?
I was struck by the statement that the Baal Shem Tov was about to pray louder, as if the volume of his utterances was more important than the words, which
Well-
isn't necessarily the case.
Mhm. Well, here, it doesn't say during that, in this moment, that he is, praying loudly. It says he is trembling and his face is burning like a torch. Now, the other stuff where it says that he used to utter a great cry and pray louder than anyone else, that's, his general practice. But at this moment, he seems to be in a completely altered state. Right? Now, again, if however you would define that, if you were at Beth Yeshurun and you saw someone who appeared to be in an altered state during the service, now, what would that be like? Yeah, Daniel.
Well, because we don't normally behave that way, we would be shocked. However, I've seen some videos or whatever of Hasidic prayer, and it's not quite this intense, but it's certainly more. But everyone's doing it. That's the norm.
Yeah, because everyone, Hasidism, even today, is modeled on the practice and the beliefs of the Baal Shem Tov. So a certain, different groups of Hasidim function in different ways. Chabad, for instance, is a little more intellectual, and Bratslav is, just all over the place. And there's everything in between. But
I don't think we should confuse, though, acting that way will produce a state of ecstasy versus a state of ecstasy should exhibit itself with these behaviors. And I think some people get that backwards. They think if they force themselves to behave this way, they'll feel closer to God. And I don't think it works that way personally.
I'm not sure. I think it works both ways because, there are what you would call meditational practices, which can lead you to an altered state. So, for instance, and you may remember this from one of our other classes, weeping is considered to be a mystical practice. Right? In other words, you would just, if you wanted to get into an altered state or an ecstatic state, you would force yourself to weep like copiously, right? Now, I mean, we all have heard that, a good cry will make you feel better. It'll make you feel differently, right? Like a really intense crying. Now, I don't practice this particular thing because they would probably carry me out of Beth Yeshurun if I did that, right? But if I wanted to get into an altered state, I think that would be one way to do it. And there are other, maybe less intense ways to try to do it. So maybe you use some of those practices or one of those practices in order to get into the state rather than, although it can work the other way around, you get into the state and then you take on the signs of being in an altered state. But an altered state it is. Now, the Vilna Gaon never practiced any of that kind of thing. That was not the way of the Nitnagdim, right? The Hasidim, one way or another, but all the time. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Lou.
I've seen people, and I've personally experienced it myself, where I zone in during certain prayers. I just, kind of zone in and tune out everything that's around me. I'm not so much in an ecstatic state, but people can walk by me and I wouldn't notice that they were there.
Right. So that's also an altered state. And I would just say it comes about through a certain kind of focus. And I will say that, I've had that experience many times in the synagogue and sometimes at home davening, right? Where you just, you're focused on a certain thing, whether it's the prayer or the emotion, or whatever it is, and that shuts out a lot of other stuff.
And it just seems to happen. It's not, I know for me, it's not intentional on my part. And sometimes the letters and the words just pop out of the prayer book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm gonna suggest to you, Lou, that it probably doesn't happen when you're going to a sports event or to a, when you're in the grocery store. You have a different kind of focus for those things, right? But when you're davening, you have a certain kind of focus that makes that experience more frequent. Whether you're consciously bringing it about or not.
My family says that I don't pay attention to them all the time anyway. So
Yes. Yeah, Carolyn. Carolyn, you have to unmute.
I was in the process.
Good.
I was going to say that, oftentimes I will find in davening that I may not be focusing on the word so much, but it is almost a meditative mantra, right? That it can take you to where you need to go. And sometimes that happens frequently within a given day, because obviously things are on my mind of some sort that need processing. And sometimes it's very not there. And so maybe this was a day that the Baal Shem Tov was just particularly overcome, that his face was flushed and his, that.
Yeah, he was in the zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm sure, well, I'm not sure of anything here, but my guess is that the Baal Shem Tov had different kinds of days, that he didn't achieve this level of intensity every time he opened up the Siddur. Which, most of us would say, yeah, we open up the Siddur with the hope of having something of an intense experience, something of a focused experience, and hopefully, we don't quite focus, to the extent that we physically sort of blow up. Other comments or questions here? Yeah, Daniel.
How can this method be incorporated into our seders?
What a timely question, Daniel. I think it helps just to have a little bit of preparation for it. That, one of the things I try to do, and it doesn't always work because we're a normal household, I try to spend just a few minutes before the Seder just by myself and focused and sort of getting into that kind of zone, thinking about what it is that I want to do and be on this Yom Tov. And it doesn't always happen, right? Because, we're a normal household and there's always things to do right before Seder. Danny, need a little help here. Where are you? Yeah. So, but I try. And I think that's, what you want to do with any religious experience, if you can, is to have a few minutes to focus beforehand on what it is that this is about. Yes, Steve.
I'm still struggling with the Hallel, and maybe I'm thinking about that old song that I'm not going to sing now, Anticipation. You think he's getting this high because he's looking forward to the special merit of being able to recite the prayers of Hallel?
Yes, could be. And maybe that is why this is mentioned, because he's gearing up for Hallel. That could be it. But again, it's all internal. He's not leading the service at this moment. It's just, in between his Amidah and his Hallel, both of which are, moments, at least potentially, of ecstasy for the Baal Shem Tov. At least that's his goal.
But we all know sometimes leading services gets in your way, being able to have praise sometimes.
Yes. That's why there are a lot of times where I'd rather not be the leader.
Right.
Okay, let's go to number 5, right? And we'll look at the response from the Mitnagdim. This is a letter which was issued just after Pesach in the year 1772. And it was signed by 16 leaders of the Jewish community of Vilna, including the Vilna Gaon. Right? So let's see what it says. To our beloved brethren, the chosen of God, who follow the ways of their ancestors and observe the way of the Lord. In other words, you guys who do all the right stuff like us. You have surely heard that a new group has arisen, not imagined by our ancestors, although the term Hasid certainly was, who call themselves Hasidim. In every city, they form an association of those who leave the established synagogues and houses of study, separating themselves from the community. And the earth was split open by their uproar, the uproar of their house of prayer. In other words, boy, are they a bunch of loudmouths. Their practices are different. They have changed the liturgy coined by our sages. Changes were relatively minor, but they did make a few changes. They have abandoned Torah study and spend all their days in frivolous speech and debauchery. That's a little extreme. They dishonor the famous and extraordinary Torah scholars of our generation. All their days are like holidays, and they believe they are rewarded for refraining from Torah study, as is well known. Now, please listen, brothers, take to heart and see the consequences of this sect. Aren't the earlier troubles we had from such sects enough? All right. What do you think that's referring to?
Shabtai Tzvi.
Shabtai Tzvi, indeed. Right? Yeah. Now a new one has sprung forth, a stock sprouting poison, weed, and wormwood. I mean, you think people are, obnoxious when they talk politics. It gets worse when they talk religion. A stock sprouting poison, weed, and wormwood. Whoever hears and sees these words, meaning the things that we're talking about here, should gird his loins like a man and turn their evil intention against them, to fight them off and pursue them as much as Jews have the ability, and from there we must disperse them so that they not gather in a minion. Okay? Pretty harsh stuff, huh? But there are certain things in this that are really key words, and one of them is this word here, the word sect. All right? Because what is a sect? What does that term imply?
A cult?
Could be, right? Certainly, if not a cult, that because cult implies some degree of compulsion or trickery, right? But certainly deviant. Yeah, Steve, you were going to say something?
It's illegitimate.
It's illegitimate, right? This, if you're a sect, you don't belong. It's like, it would be like to the Jewish community if the Hebrew Christians would want to be represented in the Jewish Federation or the Houston Rabbinical Association, right? We would say that's not going to happen, right? Because that's a sect, right? But that's how they spoke of the Hasidim, right? And what are their core accusations against the Hasidim?
They don't study Torah as much.
Says they don't study Torah, which, by the way, not entirely true. It's just a matter of emphasis. They don't study Torah 12 hours a day, right? Their emphasis is much more on the passion you bring to Judaism rather than the intellectual commitment of Torah study. Right? Yes.
They don't appear serious in their prayer.
And their prayer, it really doesn't look very serious, right?
All their days are like holidays.
All their days are like, in other words,
That
you
kind
know,
of agrees.
they're just celebrating all the time, and probably a little drinking going on there. You know, the early Hasidim were known for, you know, having a schnapps now and then, of being, you know, a way of warming up, shall we say, right? You know, like getting into the spirit. Well,
I think it's clear they grossly mischaracterized the Hasidim. There are differences clearly, but they grossly mischaracterized them, and they've misused a lot of quotes from the Torah throughout. They kind of changed and used it for their own purpose. Takes it very carefully.
yeah. So, you know, those accusations, right, are they about belief or practice or both? Or one more than the other?
I guess certainly more practice than belief.
Yeah, in other words, they're not saying that the Hasidim don't believe in God, right? They're not saying that they've rejected all the mitzvot, although, you know, they go pretty far in what they say. But it's more about the things they do. They spend their days in frivolous speech and debauchery. And when it says they dishonor the Torah scholars, what it means is they critique the Torah scholars. They say, you know, the Torah scholars were aloof from the people, unlike the Baal Shem Tov and his followers, who were always among the people, right? They believed in Torah study, but they didn't spend 12 hours a day in it. Yes, Lou.
When was this letter written relative to the beginning of the Baal Shem Tov's growth, the movement's growth? My thought is that, okay, you know, there's some group out there, they'll go away, they just won't survive, but maybe after 10 years or so, they've grown so much that they become a threat.
So it's a great question, Lou, and I'll give you what I think is the answer. Baal Shem Tov died in 1760, but it was really his successor, Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezerich, who created a movement. And over the next 11 or so years, leading up to 1771 or thereabouts, Dov Ber sends out the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov and his own disciples, and he says, I want you to go to this community. I want you to go to that community. I want you to set up a Hasidic shul after the pattern of the Baal Shem Tov. In other words, it was, you know, the Baal Shem Tov certainly established the pattern of Hasidic behavior and Hasidic values, but it was Dov Ber who made it into a movement. And it is that movement and the establishment of all those other Hasidic synagogues, which are challenging the mitnagdim for basically the votes and the hearts of Eastern European Jewry. That is the threat that the Vilna Gaon and his followers are facing. So on the one hand, it is a spiritual threat. On the other hand, it's also a financial threat. Right? It's not all about the money, but it's definitely about the money. Because if you have a town that has one big shul for all the people, and somebody else comes along and says, I'm going to set up a Hasidic shul, and we're going to show you how it's really done. And people start to drift into the Hasidic shul over the years. And they sense that there's something true about it, something real. The more people go to the Hasidic shul, the less income there is for the other shul, both in terms of, let's say, the life of the rabbi and others who are supported through that shul, and also whatever they send back to, the yeshiva in Vilna or whatever yeshiva is in their region. So it's about spiritual influence, but it's a lot about money. And that's why this letter is written, and is written with as much venom as it is.
That's what keeps executive directors up at night.
You understand the economic part and
I
the
understand.
spiritual part.
I understand both parts.
Yeah. So it's a lot about practice. It's some about belief. Based on the sources that we've already seen and the practices of the Baal Shem Tov, you can imagine how the more straight-laced mitnagdim would report to others what they saw when they went to visit Hasidic shuls. Okay, other comments or questions up to here? Yeah, Karen.
How much do you think the alcohol had to do with the altered states?
I can't say. I think probably a little bit. It is going to loosen people up a little bit. And you will see even today in many Hasidic places, there's, alcohol plays a significant role. And I know that this is something that has attracted a lot of criticism on college campuses, Chabad Purim, right? Every year you hear about 2 or 3 places where, liquor is being served, shall we say, maybe a little more freely than is either wise or legal. Right? And so maybe some. I wouldn't count it as the main factor.
Because
I think there are bigger issues involved. There are real serious critiques going on of Jewish life by the Hasidim. Alcohol is much more a means to an end, and it's not a big means to an end, I think. It's not the end. That's my
Right,
thought.
I agree. my sense is that it would not be the end, but I do wonder if it's doesn't facilitate a lot of those experiences that are described.
Yes, once you loosen up a little bit and have a little alcohol, you might be more open to an altered state experience.
Not just open, but maybe physically reacting to
Maybe,
yeah.
yeah. Or you might just, conk out.
Right.
Yes, Steve.
That's it. For me, things could have changed in the last couple 100 years, but with the exception of like Simchat Torah, for the most part, most of their alcohol, I think, is like the kiddish, like afterwards. It's not, they don't come to shul and have a schnapps before they start davening shachrit.
Right, and I assume you're talking primarily about Chabad.
Yeah,
as
I don't know
opposed
that
to
much about the other ones.
Other Hasidic groups. I mean, we don't have too many Hasidic groups in our community. So, I can't send you to, different places so easily to
I'm
check
just saying
this out.
alcohol is part of the celebration side, not as much as the prayer.
Yeah, and frankly, Chabad is much more intellectual than the average among Hasidic groups. So even though we see it there, you'd probably see much more of it and more frequently in many other Hasidic groups. Not all, but many. Marcia, did you have a question or a comment? Or Sylvia? Sylvia, yeah.
Okay, what was the role of women, and how or if did they daven or have services during the time of the Baal Shem Tov, and then later with his, with Dov Ber?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and I will tell you from what I have read that many scholars suggest that in practice, with most Hasidic communities, the women did not play an active role at all. They just didn't. Now, there were Hasidic groups that were significantly supported by women of means, right? So, some of them were known for being big supporters of this new movement, or at least, one segment, and eventually one dynasty of the Hasidic movement. But as far as you don't see any reports in Hasidic texts about women engaging in ecstatic prayer, or even women engaging in prayer, frankly. It's not, the exceptions to that are extremely rare.
Okay, and that is carried over today. I know I've been to what I would consider ultra Orthodox services, even for a bar mitzvah, and the women are behind a mechitza and they don't participate at all.
Well, there are Orthodox synagogues where women are behind the mechitza, but they are definitely participating. And I think that's true in many Hasidic groups today. It was not true, particularly in the time of the Baal Shem Tov. And I'll tell you who really made a significant change in that, and that was Chabad. Chabad supported the establishment of schools for women. Okay? And even the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was a very big advocate of, education for women, and and certainly a place within the synagogue behind the mechitza to be sure, but a place for the women in the synagogue. Whereas in many Hasidic groups, the women just, they stayed home. Maybe they came to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But after all, who's going to take care of all those kids anyway? Right? It's not going to be the men who are spending all their time in shul and having altered states, right? How much do you trust someone in an altered state to take care of your kid, right? So I think that's the answer.
Okay.
Okay? It's changed, but that's not how it was back then in the origins of Hasidism. Okay, let's go to number 7. Okay. Oh, let's number 6. All right, because this is the result of the letter, right, that we just saw, text number 5. So here it is, number 6. When letters came from Shklov to us, the holy community of Vilna, the Gaon, the Vilna Gaon, declared the holy community of Shklov is right. This clan, they are heretics. They should be thrown into a pit and not lifted out of it. That's the Talmudic phrase. Okay? Worse even than Joseph got. Joseph at least eventually got out of the pit. And the main organizer of this sect in Vilna was one named Iser, who is like his name. Iser is similar to the word Isur, which means something forbidden. Okay? And the second was one named Chaim, who was the preacher of the community. And this Chaim said of the Vilna Gaon, he is false, his Torah is false, his faith is false. Now, by the way, most Hasidim didn't disrespect the Vilna Gaon in this way. It is perfectly possible that the report that's given here is correct. But in response, there was a ruling to expel and disperse the minyan of the Karliner Hasidim. Right? So that's this one Hasidic group, which eventually became a dynasty. Chaim was fired from his position as preacher, excommunicated for 30 days, and Chaim left the city. And afterwards, the elders convened with 2 sets of rabbinic judges and the communal rabbi. They ruled to burn their writings near the manacles in the great synagogue before the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat. Right? They wouldn't do it on Shabbat, right? And they ruled that Iser, their main organizer, should go up to the top step before Shochinad. No minyan will gather in any other synagogue except for the great synagogue. And there, Iser will recite the confession composed by the rabbinic court, and the Shamash will excommunicate them and all who joined them. It's like a limited excommunication, like 30 days, right? So looking here, the community had certain responses at their disposal. And boy, did they use them. They said, we're going to punish you. And we're not going to allow any other synagogue to operate on that day, because we want everybody to see just what happens to heretics like you. So the Hasidim are being treated as total outsiders. And who's responsible for this? Who's the main force responsible for this? It's the Vilna Gaon, right? He's the leader, maybe not the political leader, but certainly the spiritual leader of the mainstream community. Okay, now number 7. All right. This is a book that was written about the Vilna Gaon, so you should know a little bit about how he operated. All his virtues were the consequence of his diligence. He took upon himself never to sleep more than 2 hours in a single day. I don't know about that. Maybe he took a nap now and then. Maybe he had a series of power naps. I don't know. But that's what they say. He never walked 4 cubits without a book of Torah and tefillin, and never engaged in idle conversation. If one of his sons came to visit him, he would greatly rejoice, not having seen him for a year or two. You know, people didn't get around as frequently then, but he would not ask him about his material welfare. And after the son rested from his journey for an hour, he would hasten him to return to his studies and say, you know, you didn't have a chance to learn Torah while you were on the road. You'll make up for it here. Okay? So he says, behold, my brother, how great is the spiritual delight and sweetness of the God-fearing, who leave the ways of this world and its affairs to labor in the study of Torah and the commandments. There did not arise like him in his explication of Torah, in his numerous compositions on the written Torah, oral Torah, and the secrets of the Torah, and he composed more than 70 volumes, which is true. The Vilna Gaon was a very prolific writer, very deep. And by the way, he was certainly very knowledgeable in the Kabbalah, but he didn't think that the Kabbalah should be taught to ordinary Jews. It should be the province of, you know, the leading sages. You know, you worked your way up to the elite, and Kabbalah was only for the elite. In that sense, the Hasidim and the Misnagdim did not disagree. They were all Kabbalists. That was the prevailing theology in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. So for the Vilna Gaon, you know, what is Judaism all about? It, you know, to be a pious Jew means you're not focused on anything else much other than the Torah. It's quiet, it's not ostentatious, and it's very, very intellectual. That's what Jewish life is about. And if you want to be part of the elite, you become part of the elite through your intellect. Okay? Comments or questions? Yes, Lou.
In text number 6, where it talks about how, I don't remember if it was Chaim or Isser said of the Vilna Gaon that he basically doesn't know what he's talking about, is very similar to what the Baal Shem Tov said to Dov Ber, which we learned in the other class. Is there think there's a connection there?
Well, there's certainly a spiritual connection. I mean, they believed that, you know, the Judaism of the Vilna Gaon was intellectually correct, but it had no soul. Those are the words of, you know, that the Baal Shem Tov said to Dov Ber. Yeah. So Lou is referencing this story that we mentioned in our other class, where basically the Baal Shem Tov converts Dov Ber from, you know, one kind of Judaism to his kind of Judaism. Dov Ber is a scholar, but he's not, you know, he's not a chassid. But, you know, he goes to visit the Baal Shem Tov because he's heard such fantastic things about this guy. And they take a book of Lurianic Kabbalah, and the Baal Shem Tov says to him, explain this passage. And he explains it. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, that's not right. Okay? And Dov Ber looks at it again and he says, well, you know, I have explained this correctly, but if you've heard another interpretation, please share it. So Baal Shem Tov says, stand up. And they stand up and he starts expounding the passage and angels start appearing in the room, right? There's like, you know, fire burning all around them, right? And the Baal Shem Tov says, you see, you know, you explained it properly, but your explanation had no soul. And that's when Dov Ber is made into a born-again chassid. Okay, we're going to finish here. We are on hiatus through Passover, so hopefully I will see you all in 3 weeks, and we'll carry on from here. Thank you all very much. Chag Sameach.
Yeshua. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
Chag Sameach.